email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
This year I've had the privilege of speaking with CEOs, CMOs, and CIOs, as well as executives, authors, and entrepreneurs. I've had the good fortune of learning from leaders of companies, brands, and institutions such as UCLA, GoDaddy, and IBM. And I've made connections with some of the smartest, most interesting thought leaders and groundbreakers in the worlds of engineering, marketing, and human resources. So for the last episode of 2022, I want to share some of the best moments, stories, and lessons learned from a great year of conversations. First up is a snippet from my conversation with Brian Zimmerman. Brian is the CEO of the Cleveland Metro Parks, tasked with overseeing and managing thousands of acres of parkland in the Cleveland area. In this clip, Brian discusses his strategy for approaching problems as a leader, including giving us a real-life example from one of his Cleveland Metro Park projects.
We never look at it as hey, this is a problem. There's an opportunity for either improved communication or process. And we built a bridge called the Wendy Park Bridge over what is arguably one of the busiest rail lines in the country, over the Norfolk Southern Railroad. We had the rights to be there, but railroads do not make your life easy to go over things or go under things. And we needed to acquire land. The land where this bridge was sitting was what they called paper deed streets. So we had to clean up a lot of that. We had to buy some private property. We had to allocate some public property. We had to get Norfolk and Southern. They had to have, engineers. We had to have process, inspections. We had to have bolt tightenings. And so it started when my son was running track as a freshman. So that would have been spring of his freshman year. And it opened 4 years later, almost the 2 weeks after he graduated high school. So it was a long process. And so you have to play the long game in some of those areas where, challenges are going to arise. And, we talked about this world-class zoo. When you build an animal exhibit, there's containment for safety on both sides of it. And so there are so many people that need to get involved. And when you're doing a big multifaceted project, the more people, the more voices you can get at the beginning to get it going is super important. But then once you get that trajectory moving, I call it, you put the hammer on the nail, and you got to keep pounding that thing down to get to the end game, because otherwise these projects can go on forever. And so, I love those, those challenging ones. And, we had one where we got permission to do a pick on the bridge, and someone didn't show up, and they called and said, "Where are you?" And the guy's like, "Well, I'm in Pittsburgh." And he goes, "Well, we're in Cleveland. We need to, he goes, "Well, go ahead." And, we got called into the office, and they were going to shut us down, and they were going to do all this stuff. And I just said, I must have misunderstood. And so I sincerely apologize. And so, there's a way to, I think, redirect sometimes when meetings may not be going quite the right direction. And so you understand where you need to get to, how you need to get there. And I think leadership, there's a level of emotional intelligence. If you don't have a high EI, leadership, it may be a little bit tougher for you, but being able to read a room and understand where you need to get to and who you need to diffuse or who you need to, fan a flame underneath a little bit to put a little pressure on, all those are skills that leaders need to have depending on which button they need to push.
Next, we have a portion from my chat with Chad Severson, CEO of Ergotron. I asked Chad if he had any advice for executives, directors, or team leaders responsible for managing the execution of complex projects. Here's what he had to say.
It's probably going to sound a little repetitive, but it's all about the people. I sincerely believe that. We have a saying here, which is, if we take care of our people, they'll take care of our customers. The financials will follow. And sometimes that's a bit cliche, but it's so true. And I've found that to be, another example is I've led organizations that have manufactured and have big manufacturing plants. And so what I found on that manufacturing floor is, when you're able to show that manufacturing employee that you're more concerned about their safety than the profit for that month, that opens a lot of doors in terms of communication and trust. And I would say the equivalent for that is, and by the way, we do that to our best of our ability. And again, we never want to rest, because you got to keep working it. But I'd say the equivalent for that in this time of pandemic and remote work is mental health. And when you can demonstrate to your employees that you're more concerned about their mental health and welfare than, the profit for that month or whatever, I think you gain a lot of credibility. And so I'd say, so the first thing is always employees. And then when you start talking about a complex project, I think, to your point on communication, let's set the North Star. What does good look like? What does the end, starting with the end in mind? And when you say a particular thing, I always found it fascinating working in groups that, if you step away from that meeting and say, well, what did you hear? And what did you hear? And what did you hear? And it's just a very different version of that North Star. And so to the extent possible, kind of getting that in writing, getting everyone to buy in and contribute to that explanation in writing just saves so much time. So, I would say, and we've found this in project work time and time again, which is go slow to go fast. If you spend that time up front, really defining that problem, what are we trying to solve, and aligning on that, then kind of step back and get out of the way.
Now let's move to my conversation with Jeanette Wade, author of The Human Team. In this clip, Jeanette discusses communication clarity and the difference between curiosity and interrogation as a team leader. Here's her advice on clear communication strategies in leadership.
Part of what I say is you have to become fascinated with people. You need to get curious, and great conversations from leaders and managers in particular start with, like you said, great questions. So do you mean left here or left there? And are you thinking of this or that? And do you fully understand this way or that way, right? And that curiosity, not interrogation, but questioning. Because I think that's also a problem. Because when you interrogate people, they shut down, they don't listen. So opening up conversation and having complete agreement, outlining things with context and purpose and why, and in addition to the information, and also concluding it for them so that they don't make their own assumptions. That's kind of the clarity tool at the end of that chapter that talks about, you got to conclude it for them. So what's your next steps? What absolutely we're looking for, by when and how, right? And all of that. Because otherwise you're assuming they're going to just take the action you want, and many times they don't.
So there are different kinds of people in the world. There are some people that naturally question, and as you put it, in a good way, not to interrogate, but to understand. And then there are people that are really big picture people, and they don't understand why you don't just get it and go off. So if I'm one of those curious people and I'm trying to get clarification on what it is you want me to go do, but the person I'm talking with, this needs to give me this information, is one of those big picture, just be clear to you, just go do it. Is there any way to kind of bridge that gap?
When you're talking to a big picture person that you're trying to influence on a team, many times we have to do it as a team, because honestly, that's part of that team recipe, that not all of us are going to hear it the same way, but the whole team needs to be aligned with clarity. So every team member has brought the element and understanding they need to take action. Sometimes the big picture people are in the team and in the room to really challenge us to take the risk and do the innovation, not know the detail. So clarity of their role is to say, what I really need from you is understand the high level purpose and mission, and to be a driver and an innovator behind that. And then the detail people can pick up the questioning.
Right.
Like having clarity of what people really can and can't do is probably part of that clarity.
Right.
Right. Don't try to make everyone the same level of clarity. It's just not going to work.
Next up is from my talk this summer with Paul Comfort, Senior Vice President of Modoxo Americas and self-described transit evangelist. In this soundbite, Paul discusses how he got into the public transportation sector and why he believes public transportation is about more than just getting passengers from point A to point B.
I wanted to help people, and I felt like the best way to do it was through local government, to be honest with you. I think that's the government that's closest to the people. It's where the rubber hits the road. That's why my favorite jobs were county administrator, where I was, running the airport, helping the schools, the 911 center, all that stuff. You got to kind of have a hand in managing. It was fun. So how I got into transportation was just that, right? I knew I wanted to go into government. I'd lost for county commissioner, but wanted a job in local government, and that's what I got, that first one I mentioned earlier. Did that for 7 years and have just stayed around public transportation. I feel like I've become, an expert in the theory that, if you spend 10,000 hours doing something, you're an expert, like the book Tipping Point and Blink taught us, or some of those books he wrote, Malcolm Gladwell, one of my favorite authors. And then, I just stayed in it. A couple times I thought about leaving the transit industry, doing the other thing, which I love full time, which is communications. I worked 16 years part-time in radio and thought about buying a radio station. So now I ended up combining it, which I think is the best way to do it, right? You combine your passions, your avocation with your vocation. And it's like, those guys have said, I never worked a day in my life because I was doing what I loved. That's not my statement. Believe me, I've worked some grueling jobs, miserable, every day nose to the grindstone jobs in this industry. But now I'm at a place where I feel like I'm self-actualized and I'm able to do just what I wanted to do, which is help as many people as possible access all of life's opportunities through public mobility. We help, 50 million people a day in North America use our services in one way or another. And I'm connected, to be honest with you, with almost all of those agencies through my company software and also through my books that have, one book you mentioned, Future Public Transportation, included 40 of the world's leading experts in public transportation. I'm writing a new book on equity and inclusion in public transit that includes interviews with, over a dozen top CEOs. And I have 50 or 60 of these top CEOs of transit systems, they don't use Rolodexes anymore, but in my contacts on my phone. And I'm texting and calling them all the time, putting on live events, live CEO roundtables. I just did one last month in Texas with some of the top leaders in the industry from cities, like Austin, Texas, and New Orleans, and all these great transit agencies. So that's why I stay involved in it, because I think it's an area where I have found a niche where I can really help people improve their lives. And I think public mobility and all that really means now, which isn't just going from A to B, we can do that through public transit. So that's why I've kind of focused on that in local government. The people that work in public transit agencies, to be honest, I'm not pulling your leg. I mean, I know I've seen behind the curtain, Dorothy, and seeing what's back. They really care about people. Most of them are motivated by a desire, just like I am, to help people. And that's why public transit agencies now have really embraced a new purpose. During the peak of the pandemic, Clint, ridership dropped dramatically, as you probably heard, 50 to 95% are ridership. And we were all about ridership. We had this, I think, a false idol to ridership personally, because it's the one thing we can't really control. Why are we measuring as our number one KPI, the one thing we can't really control? And it's not really true. If you build it, they will come. That's not completely true about public transit, nor is it about anything probably. There's a lot of other factors involved. Like right now, public transit ridership is going up. And you know why? Something that we don't control, fuel prices. And so ridership is going back up because people are like, hey, at $5 a gallon, I may want to hop on the bus for $1 versus spend $15 to get to work today on gas and then parking and everything else. So, but that's my point, is that public transit is really about more than just getting people from A to B. It's about actually now improving our quality of lives in doing things like, environmental stewardship and even promoting equity and inclusion in cities. I've got a brand new book coming out of that title, as I mentioned, and it really has become more of a raison d'etre for our agencies than just transporting people from A to B.
Let's jump down to my conversation with Matthew Bounds, senior partner at IBM. Matthew has spent his career in procurement services, so I asked him what's something you wish more people knew about the procurement services industry and your line of work in general.
That is a great question, Clint, because, procurement as a trade often gets looked at as boring. And, I view the domain of procurement is personable, very personable. You're interacting with individuals on a day-to-day basis, whether within your own company, within your client, or within your supplier base. And, we're talking real money and real impact to the bottom line. A lot of people don't know this, but there was a survey done a few years ago. There's $100 trillion US dollars that's transacted annually as companies purchase from each other either a good or a service. And so that's, procurement practitioners are right in the middle of that. They are, completing the activity that's purchasing the good or the service and ultimately impacting the bottom line with its daily operations. So again, personable and impactful are the two of the terms I like to use, whether you're doing it for our own company or you're doing it for another company like we are in an outsourced environment. most people just don't think of it that way, Clinton.
Now we'll go to my discussion with Bob Pearson. Bob is the founder and chair at the Next Practices Group, as well as the CEO of the Bliss Group. And in this clip, you'll hear him talk about the importance of aligning organizational priorities with societal needs in order to achieve a greater overall impact.
Well, the fundamental thing that we are trying to do our role in for social purpose is help companies figure out what is purposeful and sustainable from a business standpoint. One of the things that I learned, in working with Mike Waddell is when we were getting involved in the environment in a big way, he made a really good point. And, he was asked by a reporter, why are you trying to become the first carbon neutral technology company? He said, well, I like both forms of green. And I'm like, bingo. And that stuck with me forever because as long as you can make the systems better and more efficient and they're better for the environment, and you can also make more money, the two will go together forever. So our goal is to say, what are the priorities of organizations? What are the priorities of those who want to improve society? And where is that intersection that is going to be meaningful and long lasting? I think everyone's trying to do the right thing, but it's hard. It's hard to figure out what that special thing is for each company, as opposed to whatever is popular for the moment.
Next up is a portion from my talk with Beverly Ryder. Beverly is a chief commercial officer at Autonomos and is helping to build, shape, and innovate smart cities of the future. In this part of our talk, Beverly tells me what she believes is the most important ingredient in cultivating and leading high-performance teams.
I think trust is the number one thing, that your team believes in you, believes in the mission, believes in the company. And sometimes they don't believe in all three at one time. Sometimes you have to get them there, or sometimes you have to overcome together, but it has to be a team. There's no way to do it on your own. And you have to, I believe, at least, I manage every individual that works for me differently, because if you manage them the same, they're not the same person. So every person is motivated differently. Everybody has different objectives. Everybody has different career aspirations, and everybody needs a different type of mentoring. So it's really important to give the time, and it's not easy to give the time. So I'm not saying that it's easy, because it's not. And sometimes I fail miserably in this area, but I really think it's that teaming and making every single person that's on the team feel like they should be there. They're an integral block, no matter where you are in the system, and that there's a complete, like I have a complete open door policy, and we don't have hierarchy. Anybody can come to me about anything. And if they ever feel like they can't, then I've screwed up.
Right. Big
and also, the leader should take all the blame and give away all the credit.
100%.
And I see a lot of leaders, beating their chest these days. And I really don't think that's, it's your job to take the hurdles. And if your team has issues or has problems or made mistakes, that's on you. But to take away their glory, it should go to the team members that actually did that act and created that success.
Let's shift now to Benjamin Truhaft. Benjamin was the CEO of Helpful Engineering, a global open source platform with the goal of harnessing engineering talent to address systemic challenges. At the beginning of the pandemic, 13,000 people onboarded to the Helpful Engineering Slack channel in just 3 weeks in order to pitch in and help develop PPE plans and solutions for first responders around the globe. After having navigated that level of rapid growth, here is Benjamin's advice on scaling your project or company on an expedited timeline.
The most important thing right up front is to really define, these models, your managerial model, your operational model, your sustainability model. Get that, the fundamentals of how you do what you do and how to interact with you. And, we're very big believers in, don't build anything without your customer in the room, that maxim, but the way that you go about, those consultations that lead to a well-formed organization that's capable of generating well-formed solutions. Go to that scoping right away, and it might not be perfect. Enemy of good is great, right? But get it down and get it out there and iterate that really hard as your first thrust. Those 3 areas. And if you do that, you'll set yourself up well to do it, and put boundaries on it. If you give yourself 30 days to do something, it'll take you 30 days. If you give yourself 3 hours, it'll take 3 hours. Each of the artifacts that have come out of Helpful, each of the products has a different story about the challenges of bringing an openly developed product to market. And they have informed us what we have to do at that system of systems level. And so whether it's been the origami shield that came out of Helpful in the very first 2 weeks of the pandemic, that has which was the simplest of artifacts, simply a design that went on to probably be, we can't even count how many times the thing got made as a face shield. Now there are other good, even better face shields, but that was a good first example, and it's still the lowest cost one on the planet. And it's good for certain use cases, but that's been picked up by industry, and a company called Boyd made that thing 50 million times or more now. Who knows how many now. But we also know people around the world were able to pick that design up immediately and put a piece of PPE in the hands of a first responder.
Now we'll hear from Jeff Clausen, VP of Product Websites and Marketing at GoDaddy, and co-owner and former CEO of Birdwell Beach Britches. Here I asked Jeff, what is the most rewarding part of your job at GoDaddy?
So many things, but I think if I were to kind of boil it down to the two most rewarding things about my position, it's knowing that we build products that save our customers time when they're running their business, and that we help them grow by making it easier to find and engage more of their customers. And that's especially meaningful to me, that the saving small business owners time, because I'm a former CEO of a small business, and I know how hard it is to find time to do anything other than run the business. And that's, for someone with the experience I have as a marketer and a technologist, it was still difficult for me to find the time to, run marketing campaigns and, update the website. And so, to make that easy, from establishing an online presence all the way to, growing your customer base through SEO and email marketing and search and social advertising, like the fact that we make it secure and simple, like one-stop shop to grow your business, like that is deeply rewarding to me, because I know how hard that is.
Right. There's no greater education than doing it yourself. So you felt the pain.
Man,
we appreciate that.
And yeah, and I've worked at big companies, small companies, private companies, public companies, in a bunch of different roles. And without question, the hardest thing I've ever done is run a small business, and know that, again, as we were talking about, that I had a personal connection to this brand, this company, the family that started it, its customers, and the team, right, that are all ultimately counting on you as the leader to help make the right decisions to grow and to get that product in front of more people, because we believe in it so much. And so there's just no point at which you don't feel like the stakes are high, in the best possible way. And so, yeah, it was certainly the most rewarding thing I've ever done, and the most challenging, pretty much consistently, day in and day out. So to try to make that easier for people, like one of the things that drew me to GoDaddy was the idea that I could take that experience, combined with all of the the other experience I'd had at places like JP Morgan Chase and Facebook and Instagram, to take all that and fold it into a product that could then scale to hundreds of thousands, millions of small business owners, that even if they have just like 1% easier time as a result of it, like I know what that means. That means they have more time at home with their family, or they can hire the next employee, which is meaningful when you go from one employee to two, right? Or 2 to 4, like that's life changing, and it's life changing for the business, but also for that next person that got hired, right? I mean, they now have a job that they didn't have before. And so, and we're talking, the small businesses that we serve, they're really micro businesses, right? They are the hair salons in your local community, the pizza shops, the barbers and the plumbers. I mean, that we have bigger customers, but many of them are those really small, solopreneur micro businesses. And so you can also imagine, I was like, it's easy to imagine. In fact, I do this in my local community, connect with our customers who, they are the mom and pop shops, right? Like they are the people who decided I don't want to do the corporate life, or I've had enough of that, or I don't want to sell to, the big business.
Right.
I want to run this myself. And so to build products together with, my other colleagues who run other parts of the business to offer products that make that job any easier.
Sure.
At succeeding as a small business owner is deeply satisfying.
Let's go now to a clip from my recent chat with Howard Miller, Chief Information Officer at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. In this soundbite, you'll hear Howard talk about the evolving role of the CIO, as well as what he believes has been the key to his success at UCLA.
Just establishing the fact that you need to get people to talk to each other, right? And you need to understand how people work and how they operate. And, that has been key to my success at UCLA because I invested the time in people. I'll tell you two things off of that, right? We talked about, the evolving role of the CIO, where you used to have to be the smartest technical person in the room. And then you were just the person who was responsible for all of the technology. And when I describe the role today, I talk about using technology to deliver business outcomes, right? And that's really how the role has evolved. And with that said, the role that the CIO plays today is almost as much salesperson as it is technical leader, right? So when I got to UCLA, I put my vision, and it was my vision at that time, up on a board, and I had to sell that vision to my senior leaders. I had to sell it to my entire team, and I had to sell it to the school. And I didn't put that vision up on the board, even though I had a general idea of what I wanted it to look and feel like, until about 3 months of conversation with the business leaders around the school to say, these are the recurring themes. This looks like the place or the places where we should be focusing our efforts. And that all served tremendously well. And now, because all of that's in place, it's easier to sell, right? And we've come to a Rev 2.0 of that vision, but it's no longer my vision, right? It's an IT vision. It's an IT leader's vision. Everybody got to contribute to it. So it's no longer just Howard's vision, right? It's the IT leadership vision.
Next up, Deborah Borg. Deborah is the Chief Human Resources and Communications Officer at Bunge. As an HR professional, Deborah has been involved in hiring hundreds of people across her career. So I wanted to know, what advice do you have for someone out there who wants to get an interview and land their dream job? Here's what she had to say.
Oh, I've had some pretty interesting things come my way about how how people get attention. I would say your first job here is to get the interview. So leaning into networks to get the interview, being able to position yourself to be able to represent yourself. And I've had people write letters personally to the CEO that gets attention. I've had people just tap into networks to get attention. Sometimes the resume alone to a job posting site isn't it. So who do you know in the company? Have you done your homework about the company? That kind of thing. And then I think once you have the opportunity to present yourself and represent yourself, do your homework. There's nothing more off-putting than somebody that turns up for an interview and they haven't done their homework about the company. I was very impressed, Clint, that when we started talking, you knew my background and you knew that my connection back to the motherland of Malta. And then being clear about the value that you bring. You don't have a long period of time to be able to represent yourself necessarily in an interview. And so I think, being really succinct and clear about what are the three messages that you want to impart when you get there. And why the organization might need you. So there's nothing more exciting to me than being in an interview where someone says, "Here's what I think I can do and how I can create value for your organization." Gets my attention at least. So as an interviewer.
Now I'll go to my chat with Eric Frederick. Eric is the CEO of Uno Restaurants, a chain of pizza joints based out of Chicago with over 100 locations in 20 states and 5 countries. In this clip, Eric discusses what his mission was when he took the reins as CEO in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic and what adjustments he had to make in order to excel.
Well, and again, you and I were in the military, and one of the things you get is this intertwining of the mission and the people. And so really from a mission standpoint, I wanted to transform Uno from being highly dependent on company operated restaurants to much more franchising, which means we had to grow in the franchising world. And we were sitting on a hidden gem with Uno Foods. And so the idea was those would be our growth vehicles, where casual dining, our existing restaurants would sort of be the cash cow to fund our growth. So that was a real big part. But in order to get there, year one had to be laying the foundation for it. And I talked about some of those things with the technology and getting the team right and all that. We built our first prototype restaurant. We hadn't built a domestic restaurant in maybe 10 years. And then that became sort of the showcase for new franchisees and whatnot. So those are the big things. And the other big thing was I wanted to get our people through safely. And we went above and beyond where I think a lot of people did. If somebody tested positive for COVID in their restaurant, we stopped serving people. We closed the restaurants, and until we could staff it with people who had tested negative, we would not reopen. It was really all about keeping people safe. And I know other restaurants where they did not do that, and frankly, too bad for them and their guests. But they supplied us with some employees. A bit of a silver lining.
Right.
And I'm happy to say that I won't go into the specific numbers, but we had we made it through pretty unscathed health-wise, among our workforce. And we've got an older population. A lot of our folks have been with us for a long, long time, especially our back of the house folks and people working in the factory and whatnot. And so very, very happy with the results there. And we did everything. We incented vaccines. We, did whatever we could to social distance and, keep shifts to, apart so they wouldn't pass in between them. But very, very proud of that effort.
Right. And that's amazing. You mentioned Uno Foods. Is that your frozen items you have in stores now?
Yeah. And so we've increased sales since COVID began by about 30%. Off a decent run rate. So, one of the things that, we figured is at the end of the day, everybody loves pizza. And when people were in the shutdown, they're going to get their pizza from somewhere. So if they couldn't get it at our restaurants, then we wanted to get it at the grocery store, at BJ's or Sam's Club or whatnot. And really just pushed that pretty heavy, and that made up a bunch of the difference for us and whatnot. So, but we've got an amazing crew over there, and we took them from being a bit of an afterthought to genuinely part of the family.
Let's go now to my conversation with Kip Knight, author of Learn to Leap and Crafting Persuasion. In this snippet, you'll hear the story of when Kip was the marketing VP for Yum Brands in the 90s, and he and his team were tasked with turning around brand image of KFC in the UK. This is such a great story.
Well, it was a fascinating experience, and frankly, it was one of those that I didn't fully appreciate until I got on the ground over there. But KFC had been around for about 50 years before I landed, and had its share of successes, but frankly had fallen upon tough times because the target audience were drunk young men coming out of pubs at night. They said that the reason they gave you a bucket was a convenient package to throw up in after you'd eaten your food. The nickname was Kentucky Fried Rat. I mean, you couldn't have more hair on this ball if you wanted to. It was just a really horrible brand image. And yet we knew, based on our experience in other countries, that, if we could go back to the fundamentals of quality food and caring for your family and good value for the money, we could probably make this work. And so one advice I would give to your listeners, if you're trying to turn around a failed business, just go back and study your roots. What made you successful in the first place? Because in many cases, the reason you're in trouble is you kind of strayed away from those roots. I mean, they went for the quick, easy sale in terms of building all of their restaurants literally around the bars and concentrating on one day part late at night and one demographic, drunk young men. I would argue that's probably not the foundation for a great brand. So we pivoted. We came up with a product called the Family Feast, which was a whole bunch of food for £9.99, which was a phenomenal deal. And when I got some pushback on that in terms of the economics, I said, you bring pounds to the bank, not percentages. So another tip I would give your folks is if you're analyzing something, margins are one thing, but actual dollars in mass is what really counts. So we did that. We opened up some restaurants that were more for families with drive-throughs. And we really went after families as our primary audience. And I'm really pleased to say after 3 years, we had the best ROI of any PepsiCo restaurant investment they ever made. And KFC to this day continues to do very well in the UK. And of all the things that I've done in my career in terms of turnarounds, that's the one that I'm the most proud of.
Closing out this list, we'll hear from Adam Mindler. Adam is the CEO of the Velaz Group and host of the 30-Minute Mentors podcast. In this soundbite, Adam discusses his perspective on mentors and mentorship and gives advice to people who might be looking for a successful mentor-mentee relationship.
On my podcast, I bring on what I believe are the best network of mentors possible, people who are Fortune 500 CEOs, founders of household name companies, well-known celebrities, Hall of Fame athletes, retired generals and admirals. And the concept of the show isn't to spend 30 minutes talking about mentorship, but rather to give listeners access to people who could mentor them for 30 minutes. And something that I believe very strongly in is it's great to have what I have had, which is a great mentor, but it's also important to have what I call mini mentors, people who you might connect with once, or you might connect with once a year, or once every few years. And that interaction could be a game changer to you. It could be a game changer to your life, could be a game changer to your career. And sometimes you don't even need to connect with them directly. It could be listening to a podcast. It could be reading a book. I've had guests on my podcast who have spoken about mentors they've had in their lives who they've never met. I had a Emmy Award-winning broadcaster who told me that the biggest mentor in her life is Oprah Winfrey. She's never met Oprah, but she's consumed all of Oprah's content. So it's important for anyone listening to this conversation to understand mentorship through a broader lens, to try to rethink mentorship, and to be open-minded in terms of how you receive mentorship, but to understand that mentorship is integral to success. You're never going to get there alone. And to really make it not only to the top, but to attain really any level of success, you need to have the help of those around you, those who have been there, those who can help you in any shape, form, or fashion. It's not a matter of going out and approaching someone and say, will you mentor me? It doesn't work that way. It's a matter of identifying people in your network. It could be people in your company. It could be people who you're connected to. It could be people who you don't know, and it should be people who you don't know, but you might share some common bond with. And there have been so many great stories that I've heard from so many of the most successful leaders in America who have had the opportunity to speak to, who've spoken about how they've developed their best mentor-mentee relationships. And it started by reaching out to a stranger, or it started by reaching out to someone in their network and asking for an introduction to someone who they knew. But the person who they knew, or that stranger, was someone who they had something in common with. So you want to try to find someone who you will really enjoy being around. They will really enjoy being around you. It shouldn't be a chore. It shouldn't be a hassle. It shouldn't be a burden. It shouldn't be an obligation for either party. And think about, again, your passions, but also think about what are other commonalities that you and someone that you might be interested in cultivating a relationship with share. And I would just start there, and I wouldn't be afraid. You've got to put yourself out there.
Well, that's going to do it for 2022. Thank you to each and every one of my guests for coming on the podcast this year and sharing their time and wisdom with all of us. And a huge thank you to everyone out there listening and learning from these conversations. I hope you all have a happy and healthy holiday season, and I'll see you in 2023.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpadgett.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett is a production of Forbes Books.